All right, so today we're going to be taking a deep dive into a case that's really a tangled web. It all stems with Mariah Wilson. She's a professional cyclist, and she was found dead in her home in Austin, Texas, May 11th, 2022. And initially, things were pretty confusing.
Yeah, when the 911 call came in, it was from Mariah's friend, Caitlin Cash.
Yeah.
And when she found Mariah, she was on the bathroom floor. And the whole scene was really brutal. There were signs of a struggle, and they even found traces of cerebrospinal fluid, so indicating a very serious head injury.
Wow. And to add to the mystery, her expensive racing bike was missing from the scene. So naturally, everyone thought, oh, robbery gone wrong.
Right.
But then they later found the bike abandoned in the woods nearby.
Yeah, looking back, that abandoned bike, that was probably a very carefully planned distraction. It seems like the killer knew that investigators would immediately focus on that missing bike. That would buy them time to cover their tracks. Classic misdirection, really, suggests a level of premeditation that's pretty chilling.
Yeah, I mean, that's some real planning and thought put into that. So
Yeah.
if it wasn't a random robbery, what was it? Well, the investigation uncovered a love triangle, which always makes things interesting. It involved Mariah, her ex-boyfriend, Colin Strickland, and his current girlfriend, Caitlin Armstrong. So we've got some complicated relationships here.
Yeah, very, very complicated. The timeline's important here.
Yeah.
So Colin and Caitlin had been dating, and they even lived together for a short time. Then they broke up briefly. And during that time apart, Colin and Mariah had a short but pretty intense relationship. But then Colin and Caitlin got back together.
Okay, so even though Colin was back with Caitlin, he and Mariah were still in contact. I mean, that's definitely a recipe for tension, right?
Yeah, definitely.
So where does Caitlin Cash, the friend who found Mariah's body, fit into all of this?
Well, initially, she was considered a person of interest just because she was the one who found Mariah. But they ran a gunpowder residue test, which analyzes the traces of chemicals that are released when a gun is fired. And that test actually cleared her name.
Okay, so that makes sense. So the focus then shifts to Colin and Caitlin Armstrong. And Colin was actually the last person to see Mariah alive. They had spent the day together. They even had drinks at a cafe. And wasn't there something about a black Jeep that was seen near Mariah's house around the time of the murder?
Right, yeah, and that Jeep was later linked to Colin, which, just added to the suspicion that was surrounding him. And then during his first interview with the police, he was, noticeably nervous. He couldn't provide a solid alibi for Caitlin Armstrong. And he also kind of conveniently left out details about his relationship with Mariah.
A lot of red flags there.
Sure.
But then the investigation took a really interesting turn when they brought Caitlin Armstrong in for questioning.
Right.
So tell me about that.
Well, it wasn't directly related to the murder at first. She had an outstanding warrant for a pretty minor theft of service charge. But this gave the police a chance to question her about Mariah.
Oh, that's clever police work.
Yeah.
So what was the atmosphere like during that interrogation? Was she cooperative?
Not at all. She was very evasive. Right away, she asked for a lawyer. And she just tried to deflect any questions about Mariah or where she was on the night of the murder. It was really tense. You could just feel the detective trying to get her to open up.
Oh, I bet. A classic game of cat and mouse.
Yeah.
Was there a moment, though, where things shifted, where they got something useful from her?
There was a key moment. The detective, he revealed that Caitlin Armstrong's vehicle had been seen near Mariah's house on the night of the murder. And her reaction was very telling. She got visibly flustered, she couldn't explain it away, and ultimately she chose to remain silent.
Well, that's a pretty damning detail. So did they let her go at that point?
They had to. But they weren't done with Colin yet. Remember that shaky alibi? They brought him back in for more questioning, but this time with a lawyer present, which, changes the dynamic significantly.
I can imagine. Things get a lot more careful with a lawyer involved.
Yeah.
Did Colin stick to his story? Did he maintain that he was innocent?
He did. But this second interview, it revealed some pretty crucial information about Caitlin Armstrong's personality. Colin described her as extremely jealous and possessive. He actually went so far as to compare her potential for violence to his 6-year-old son.
Whoa. He compared his girlfriend to his 6-year-old son in terms of potential for violence? That's disturbing.
Yeah, it is. And it just really highlights how unaware he was of the potential danger that Caitlin Armstrong might pose. And then came the real bombshell. Colin mentioned that he had bought Caitlin Armstrong a gun. For self-defense, he said, a few months before the murder.
Uh-oh. I have a bad feeling about where this is going.
Yeah. Ballistics tests later confirmed that the murder weapon was the very same gun that Colin had given her.
This is turning into a real nightmare scenario. So they finally have enough to arrest her, right?
They did, but she had disappeared.
What, like completely gone?
Gone. It turns out she had used a fake passport and boarded a flight to Costa Rica just hours before they officially named her as the prime suspect.
So she had a plan, but the police weren't giving up, were they?
No, not a chance. They used her phone records and surveillance footage to track her movements, and they finally pinpointed her to a hostel in Santa Teresa Beach in Costa Rica.
Okay, so Costa Rica, that's a pretty popular tourist destination. How did they find her in a place so crowded?
It was actually pretty clever. An officer posed as someone who was looking for a yoga instructor, which is how Caitlin Armstrong was supporting herself at the time, and they contacted her online, and she agreed to meet.
So she walked right into their trap.
Well, I mean, she was desperate. Desperate times, desperate measures, and I think she was probably just longing for some normalcy. She had even gone to great lengths to change her appearance, including even some surgical procedures. But there's one thing she couldn't change: her eyes.
Betrayed by her own eyes. That's almost poetic justice. So they brought her back to the U.S. to face trial.
Yes, and even then, she tried to escape again. During a doctor's appointment outside of jail, she jumped out of a bathroom window and ran.
Wow, this woman is determined. Did she get away?
No, not this time. They caught her pretty quickly. I mean, the evidence against her was overwhelming at that point. The car, the gun, her jealousy, the escape attempts, the surveillance footage. A year and a half after Mariah Wilson's murder, Caitlin Armstrong was found guilty of first-degree murder, and she was sentenced to 90 years in prison.
90 years, that's a long time. She'll have plenty of time to think about the consequences of her actions.
Yeah.
This whole case has been just a roller coaster. Twists and turns. It really highlights just the dark side of human nature, and the destructive power of jealousy. I mean, she went to extraordinary lengths to cover her tracks.
It's true. It's a stark reminder that the line between love and obsession can be dangerously thin. Sometimes the people we think we know best can be capable of really shocking acts.
Yeah, it makes you wonder, what was going through her mind during all of this? To go from a seemingly normal life to plotting and carrying out a murder like that, that's a huge leap.
Yeah.
What are some of the psychological factors that might be at play in a case like this?
Well, I think obsession is a really powerful force. And in this case, Caitlin Armstrong's inability to let go of Colin, even after he had clearly moved on, that really fueled her actions, it seems. It wasn't just jealousy, it was a consuming obsession that really distorted her reality and drove her to those extreme measures. I mean, this wasn't a crime of passion. It was calculated. It was meticulously planned. She stalked Mariah and Colin. She got a fake passport. She even altered her appearance.
Yeah, her actions were definitely premeditated. She didn't just snap in a moment of anger. It seems like she spent months, maybe even years, obsessing over Colin and Mariah. But it's important to remember that she was held accountable for her actions in the end, right? The justice system, even with all its imperfections, it worked in this case.
Absolutely. And while we can't bring Mariah back, the fact that Caitlin Armstrong was brought to justice, it offers some solace to her loved ones.
It's a small comfort, but an important one, I think. This case really highlights the ripple effect of violence, Mariah lost her life. Caitlin Armstrong will spend the rest of her life behind bars. And Colin is left with the guilt and trauma of being entangled in such a horrific event. It's a reminder that our actions have consequences, and sometimes we just don't foresee them.
Yeah, and sometimes even seemingly insignificant choices, like buying someone a gun, it can have devastating and unintended outcomes.
That's a haunting thought. It makes you wonder about all the what-ifs in this case. What if Colin and Caitlin had never broken up? What if Mariah hadn't come to Austin? What if Caitlin Armstrong had, recognized the danger of her obsession and gotten help?
It's natural to think about those questions when you're faced with such a senseless tragedy, but ultimately we can only learn from the past and make better, more informed choices in the present. This case, even though it was tragic, it can serve as a valuable lesson about recognizing red flags in relationships, seeking help when we need it, and just understanding the consequences of our actions.
This has been a real deep dive into the dark undercurrents of human behavior. We've seen how love can turn into obsession, how seemingly ordinary people can do terrible things, and how the pursuit of justice, while it can be long and winding, can prevail.
It's true. Cases like this remind us that the world can be a dangerous place, but they also highlight the strength of the human spirit and the dedication of those who fight for justice and the power of truth.
You're right. It's easy to get lost in the darkness, but there's always hope. In this case, the hope lies in the fact that Caitlin Armstrong was held accountable, that Mariah Wilson's family received some measure of justice, and that we can all learn from this tragedy and try to create a safer and more compassionate world.
Yeah, it's a reminder that we all have a part to play in building a society that really prioritizes mental health and encourages people to get help, when they're struggling. Sometimes those struggles, they manifest in ways that we just don't expect. And recognizing those warning signs can be so crucial. Absolutely. It's like you said earlier, the abandoned bike, it was a calculated distraction. And in a similar way, Caitlin Armstrong's seemingly normal life, it was really masking a very dangerous obsession. It's a reminder that things aren't always as they appear, and we need to pay attention to those subtle cues, those things that might signal that there's trouble brewing beneath the surface.
Yeah, it's easy to focus on the big moments in a case like this.
Yeah.
The murder, the escape, the trial. But it's those smaller details, the seemingly insignificant choices, those can be the things that really have the most profound impact. The decision to buy a gun, the failure to recognize and address a growing obsession. Those are the things that can set a tragedy in motion.
And those choices, they often have ripple effects, impacting not just the people directly involved, but also their families, their friends, even the community. The trauma that's caused by a crime like this, it spreads outwards, leaving scars on everyone that it touches.
It's a sobering thought. But in the face of such darkness, I think it's important to remember the dedication and the skill of the investigators who worked on this case. They worked tirelessly to bring Caitlin Armstrong to justice. They meticulously pieced together evidence, phone records, surveillance footage, witness testimonies. They followed a trail that spanned international borders.
Yeah, their persistence is a testament to how important it is to seek truth and hold people accountable for their actions, no matter how hard it is. It's a reminder that justice can prevail even in the most complex and perplexing cases.
Well said. This deep dive has taken us through so many emotions. Shock, disbelief, anger, and ultimately, I think, a sense of relief that justice was served. This is a case that really underscores the importance of vigilance, awareness, and open communication, both in our personal relationships and in society as a whole.
And it leaves us with a better understanding of the human capacity for both love and for darkness, reminding us that the choices we make can have far-reaching and often unforeseen consequences.
We've covered a lot in this deep dive, and I think it's safe to say this case will stick with us for a while. It's a reminder of just how complex human nature can be, and how important it is to seek help when we need it, both for ourselves and the people we care about.
It really reinforces the need for ongoing dialogue about mental health awareness and how to create a society where people feel comfortable getting support, without shame, without stigma.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into a truly harrowing case. We'll keep exploring these dark truths, uncovering the complexities of human behavior, and searching for understanding in the face of the unimaginable. Until next time, stay curious and stay vigilant.